you've ruled out the impossible. Whatever remains, however improbable, must be true.
And it is not a question of a little occultism or a touch of mysticism, Mr. Denton. It is vampirism, and there's a host of damned souls at Pelham House.
Thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night.
Here, the old gods are dead.
And what of the true God?
He's dead. Can't complain.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
You're listening to Paranormal UK Radio.
Welcome to Paranormal UK Radio. I'm your host, Irene Allen Block, and with me today is Mark Johnson.
Hello.
Hello, Mark. And Andy Chaplin.
Hello.
So how are you doing, Irene? How was your weekend?
How's my week? We're going through Storm Angus. No. There's floods, power cuts, and 90-odd mile-an-hour winds, I think it is. 95 mile-an-hour winds.
So this
has been going on for a couple of days now. And torrential rain. The garden looks like a mud bath for hippopotamuses.
Well, that's typical Wales winter weather then, isn't it?
And summer. What are you talking about? And summer. We've had hailstones in the middle of summer, in Wales.
Well, at least here in sunny Colorado, we've had one little snowstorm, and that's it so far. So I'm going to knock on wood.
Yeah, you had one little snowstorm, right? And the following day, you were all walking around in shorts and T-shirts.
Ain't life grand?
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
For some of us, anyway.
I have not got out of my winter woolies for nearly 2 years now.
Well, that's why you need to move to Italy.
Yeah, I know. Oh, I'm going to Italy.
Bask in the sun.
I'm going to Italy. That's where I'm going to retire to. South of Italy, Isla Capri, Amalfi, Pompeii, Vesuvius.
We'll never see you again.
Salento.
If we go looking for you, we know to go look for the nearest umbrella, and you'll be sitting under there with a Prosecco.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm a bit too old to be sitting under there with a nice Italian as well, but there you go.
Well,
never mind.
Never say never. That's why they invented cougars.
I've got my wrinkly at home. Don't be silly.
Okay. Well, you know what? We have a great show tonight. You want me to go ahead and introduce our guest?
Yeah, do that, Mark.
Okay. So our guest tonight has had a 28-year professional career in education, school teaching, and counseling. She's also the author of the book, The Dual Soul Connection, The Alien Agenda for Human Advancement, co-authored with U.S. astrophysicist Dr. Rudy Scheild, and talking about her own experiences with the alien encounter subject. So we would like to welcome Suzy Hansen to the program. How are you today, Suzy?
I'm very well, thank you, Mark. And hi to you, Irene.
Hello, Suzy. It's nice to meet you. It
sounds as if you're having similar weather problems to what we're having over here. We've had earthquakes all week.
Oh, I know. Terrible, isn't it?
Quite shocking.
I saw the video of some of the tsunami flooding. That was pretty horrific.
Well, we've had what's called liquefaction, which is water rising up out of the ground, rather muddy water, and it can cover quite large areas. So that's been pretty unpleasant too.
But you're safe, Suzy. That's the main thing.
Yes, that's right. Yep.
Well, that's good to hear. As I mentioned to you before the show, I grew up in California. I lived through 2 major earthquakes, not quite as big as what hit you, but I mean it caused a lot of damage, and so I totally can sympathize with what you're going through.
Definitely.
Yes. Well,
I don't know what the world's coming to, Mark, because there's earthquakes going on down the centre of Italy as well. For the last month.
Yes, and right around the Ring of Fire as well, and we're right at the bottom of the Ring of Fire, so there's been quite a lot of activity around the Pacific.
Yeah.
I feel personally the Earth is going through some shifts and changes, and it's going through some adjustments, not nearly the apocalyptic type that some people are afraid of. But I think this is, we're just going through a turbulent phase right now. We'll have to wait and see how things go. So
Yes, I agree. I think it's quite cyclic, and I think we can expect more of the same for a while at least.
yes. Well, Suzy, we love having you here on the program. We wanted to talk because of your experiences. Now, I did read your book, The Dual Soul Connection, which I have to recommend for our listeners. If you want to read, it is, in my opinion, probably one of the best, most comprehensive books on the contactee phenomenon. And you know what? I'm going to ask you, Suzy, because I know it's so different. Several terms get floated around. What would you consider your experiences? Would you consider yourself a contactee or experiencer? What would you say you are?
Well, I call myself an experiencer. I think people get muddled up these days. Going back in time to when the contactees first arose in public notoriety, they were having contact with very peaceful, loving entities. And then we moved on in around about the 70s. We had the more traumatic experiences that people were reporting and calling themselves abductees, some of these abduction experiences that were happening at the time. And then arising from that group, we eventually had the experiencers who sort of came to term with their experiences, investigated them, found that they weren't quite as traumatic as they'd first thought, began experiencing some more positive activities and contacts. And so I would put myself in the latter group, the experiencers. However, having said that, I've sort of coined the term communicators, which is all-encompassing and includes us all. I think that we're all communicators of alien intelligence. We've had contact with different off-world species, even though our experiences may vary greatly. Our common denominator is that we're all communicating with something that's not of this planet.
And what I would like to do to start off, because I have a lot of great questions for you, but I think what I would like to do is, could you tell the audience briefly, and I know that, a lot of it they'll need to go buy the book to read the book for the full, but just for our audience, could you tell us a little bit about how you came to realize that you were having these experiences?
Okay, well, as a child, I used to wake up at night on occasions and see these golden silhouettes by the bed. I wasn't at all frightened of them, and it wasn't until some time later in my life that I actually realised I'd been communicating with them with my mind. So it must have seemed to me to be a very natural thing to do as a child, to do that and not really think twice about it. Talking to my mother and other family members who had a church background, went to church in New Zealand in the 50s, as many families did do, was part of the community, and listening to my extended family members talk about spirit contact, because my mother's side of the family were very much into psychic things, spirit contact, early healing in New Zealand, etc., early spiritualist church activity. Their explanation was that I was actually seeing either the spirits of relatives who'd passed over or some kind of guardian angel. However, even as a young child, I knew that this did not quite fit what I was experiencing, and but I had no other way of describing it in those days. Throughout my teenage years, I didn't really see much of that anymore. It was as if whatever it was at that stage had left me alone, in order to possibly go through the puberty years, but also to go through the external exams that we all do in our teenage years at school that take us out into the world. But the moment I got out into the world at the age of 20, having finished my teaching qualifications, I had a real catalyst experience on a lonely country road in New Zealand, where my car, containing myself and my flatmate, was engulfed by a massive ball of light. And this experience started with us seeing some lights in the distance, two white lights, which we thought were probably the landing lights of an agricultural aircraft coming into land. However, they just clicked off and appeared over the hills adjacent to us, next to us, and that caused terrific fear and consternation. We brought the car basically to a halt, and just as quickly the lights disappeared again. So some discussion took place as to what the logical explanation could be. Was it a fast-moving helicopter, or what was it? The lights appeared within a split second ahead of us again and then disappeared. So we're sitting there swiveling our heads around, wondering what on earth was going on. So we decided to proceed on our way, thinking, well, whatever it was, it's gone. We got just a very short distance, 100 metres down a road, and my flatmate who was driving said, "Oh my God, whatever it is, it's coming up behind us." And within a few seconds, we were engulfed by a massive ball of light that was accompanied by the most excruciating, graunching, vibrating sound. You could feel the vibrations going through the car, through your body, through your clothing, everything. And the light was so phenomenally bright that we both lost consciousness. And it was a bright, sunny afternoon, late afternoon, lovely, what we call a Hawke's Bay sunshine afternoon in New Zealand, sunshine on the paddocks full of sheep and trees, and everything looked beautiful. And our next memory was of feeling the car hit the road as we sort of woke up, if I can put it that way. It was pitch black. We were at the far end of a 2-kilometre straight that previously we'd been at the beginning of, and we were heading straight for a one-way bridge. So that was a fairly traumatic experience, and I guess that was a catalyst experience that catapulted me straight into UFO sighting research, but also UFO contact, because it was around about that time, shortly afterwards, that I obtained the first book from the States about abductions and missing time. So that word leapt out at me, missing time, off the pages, and I began to realise that something was happening in my life, and may well have been happening my entire life, that I didn't understand, and at that point in time really frightened me. So it took me many years to come to terms and investigate what I was experiencing, and to realise that it actually was all very positive. It wasn't negative at all, although experiences like that, where I was taken on board a craft, the initial experience was traumatic. And maybe that was designed, if I can put it that way, to wake me up and to set me on this path.
Now, with the traumatic experiences, and as you just mentioned, maybe it was done to kind of wake you up and push you in a certain direction. I know a lot of abductees, or people who've had these experiences, complain that why are they doing this to me? We're nothing but like lab animals to them, and they feel very used and abused. And yet, are you familiar with Dr. John Mack's work?
Yes.
Yes. So in the hypnosis work that he did with so many patients, that seems like that a lot of these people are just not awoken to the fact that they may have even made a contract before they came into this life to participate in these types of experiences. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I'd agree with that, although having said that, I also acknowledge that there may be any amount of extraterrestrial groups visiting this planet. They may all have different agendas. They may all be communicating with different groups of people on the planet, and it may be that the group I've been communicating with is different to some of those people who've experienced traumatic experiences. But certainly one of the other factors that comes into play where people may be afraid of their experiences is telepathy, and this is a really big subject for me. I've had, I believe, a lot of experience on board craft in different modes of telepathy with entities, and I think that if people are in a state of fear, they've slipped out of the altered state that the entities may have put them in to protect them, I believe. Some people may see that differently. They may see it as a more covert reason for doing it. But certainly in my experience, even I have been put into that state on many occasions simply to make ease of transport and the transition easier. But if people wake up and find themselves on a craft with strange things happening, naturally the first instinct is going to be terrific fear. And once you are in that state, you cut yourself off, I believe, from any form of telepathic communication that may be being attempted to calm you or explain to you what's happening. So there are a number of things that come into play that create fear in people's lives around these experiences.
When the types of experiences that you were having, and you mentioned some of them being traumatic, were you able to remember these consciously, or did you start realizing you were having some strange experiences and you sought out hypnotic regression to try to jog your memory?
No, in actual fact, in terms of the actual experiences on the craft, I have not had any that were traumatic. The parts of the experience that were traumatic initially were when I was in my 20s, and if I can use the phrase, during the pickup where you're being removed from your home or whatever and going with these entities to a craft, my memories of those occasions on 3 occasions or 4 occasions were traumatic, including the one I described before. But they were traumatic simply because I didn't understand what was happening, and it took some years before I began to realize what was happening. And one of the things that helped me with that was another catalyst situation where, when my children were very young, I found myself standing in the hall of my home with one of my children, and my husband was not there at the time. And I found that I could understand what the 3 greys who were present in the hallway as well were actually saying to each other. So I'd clicked into this mode of telepathy that obviously I'd been experiencing all my life but didn't have recall of at that time. So I clicked into being able to understand what they were saying to each other, and when they realized that I was listening and understanding and actually began participating by saying, I'm not leaving the house with you this time because I'm not leaving my other son on his own, a little negotiation kind of conversation took place where they agreed to leave an entity there with my son to make sure that he didn't wake and was not traumatized in any way by finding no one else was in the house. So at that point, I actually went with them. Now, later on, this really surprised me to recall this, that I would do that, but I think it emphasizes the trust that I had in them at the time. And from that point on, I heard them say to each other, okay, she is, she's cognizant, she's understanding what we're saying, it's time for her to remember more. So from that point on, I began to have much more conscious memory of my experiences, either the beginnings and the ends, snippets in the middle, until I got to the point where on a number of occasions I remembered the entire process in absolute detail of what the craft was like that picked me up, how it picked me up, what was on board, who was on board, where we were taken, what took place in detail, and the return. So I'm quite fortunate in that I have a lot of quite extensive conscious memory and snippets of memory. When I came to write the book, I decided, having resisted regression therapy for about 20 years, despite lots of encouragement from other researchers and friends, I'd resisted it because there was so much controversy around it in the contact field, and I decided that, considering I had quite extensive conscious memory, I would just maintain that. But that was not meant to be, obviously, because one morning I woke up and I just knew as clear as day that I actually needed to go and have some regressions on some of the experiences that I had only partial memory or snippets of memory of. And it was then that the idea of putting it all into a book began to unfold. And when I say unfold, it's like unusual things happened that threw people in my path, or threw situations or opportunities in my path, and it just felt like it was part of destiny. So it rolled on from there. And
would you call that synchronicity?
Yeah, definitely synchronicity. And when I got in touch with Dr. Rudy Schild, it was he who suggested that I keep everything uniform and that I do regression on all of the experiences that I planned to put in the book. And those experiences in the book, is about 39 of them, I think, 27 or something like that. That's only part of what I have experienced. There's many more experiences I talk about in my speeches that I couldn't fit into the book, of course.
Suzy, I've got an absolute ton of questions, and this is like a fascinating topic. It's like probably the number one topic I'm interested in at the moment. Can you describe who they were, what they looked like, and what the telepathic interactions were?
Okay, well, first question, who they were, that's more complex than a simple answer can give. In most of the time, I have had experience with what are proverbially called the greys, the small or tall, pale entities with very pale skin, ranging from a creamy grey colour right through to more of a charcoal spotty coloured skin. But also on the craft, I've had experience since early childhood of a number of mixed species. So they've been interbreeding and creating new mixed species within their own species. And I've also seen what I call a rootstock of the greys on board craft, which are what I call the elders, the very old stock of the greys, who are extremely lined and look significantly different to the grey that you hear the most about in the contact field. But I've also seen mantis on board craft and other kinds of species. So there's a whole conglomerate of species who are working on different programs and on this agenda that I outline in my book, which is to help us to evolve to a state where we're going to be prepared for open contact with other species. But in particular, the emphasis is on the spiritual evolution of this planet, because they consider that we've gone retrograde in many ways. And what was the second part of your question, Andrew?
Sorry, just quickly, when you say retrograde, does that mean kind of like we're going backwards in terms of our spirituality?
Yes, overall. I mean, I can think of many people who are not. Of course, we can all think of people and groups that are, right up there, concentrating on spirituality in their life. But overall, I think the fact that we have technology that can be extremely harmful to humans that is actually being used in that capacity shows that we do not understand our fellow man as well as we like to think that we do. And if we can't get our own backyard cleaned up, then why on earth are we going out into space? Because we don't want to mess up someone else's backyard or influence other species out there negatively.
And have you met what some people call the reptilian types as well?
No, I have not. I've never met a reptilian at all. That's the one species that people talk about that I have not seen on board the craft. I have not seen them in association with these programs at all.
Do you believe that some of the greys are positive? Because most people kind of like would paint the greys as quite negative in what they do and how they do things.
Well, certainly down here in Australia and New Zealand, we don't think that way. Actually, we think that most of the people having contact down here have had more positive contact. Not all, of course, but that most people are reporting positive contact. So it's quite a different thing to speak in the States or the UK, for example. I found in the UK when I spoke there last year that the attitude was very, very positive towards my speech. It was well received. In the States, of course, they're quite entrenched in the negative side of things, but that's entirely possible that there are different groups working with humans, and certainly the group that I've been working with are positive in their intent and what they do.
Well, the one question I had when you're mentioning the other races, one of the more popular races that a lot of experiencers will mention, especially in positive aspects, are they call them the Nordics.
Yes.
Which is a very human looking, in fact, they could even pass for human in public. Have you ever had experiences with those types of beings?
Yes, definitely. In chapter 23 of my book called Passing Through the Planet, I describe actually being taught to fly a scout craft, a small craft, by these human-looking beings. I don't choose to call them Nordics, although in my book I did describe them as looking like that description that people give of Nordics. They were extremely tall and quite angular, but they would just pass as tall human beings. And I've had many, many experiences with them alongside the greys. And actually, when I had this experience with them, we were actually on board a large grey craft, and they were brought into the hangar area and introduced to me, and I was told I would be working with them on that particular occasion. So I've been gathering together all my experiences with this particular group, the human-looking group, and they will be part of the book that I'm in the process of writing now.
One question that I have for people who have this experience, I know a lot of people who are afraid and they lean towards the negative side and they feel like they're being treated as lab rats. And yet there are people like yourself that have had positive experiences. But, you know, you're dealing with a species that is very much more advanced than us in every way, not just through intelligence and technology, but spiritually. Do you ever get the feeling that, like, oh, I don't know, this is a very human concept here, that they look down on us a little bit, like, you know, we're just a bunch of spoiled brats who need a good spanking? Or, I mean, just...
well, you've made a good point there. No, I have experienced with the greys in particular, I think they have a very officious manner, if I can put it that way. And they're very compartmentalized, they're very hive mind, they're very on the ball, and everything is planned down to the last detail with them in general, I have found. I've never found that they have looked down on any of the humans. That I've found them to be very patient, very willing to impart knowledge at any opportunity. Particularly, I recall when I was a child, very, very particular about training human children in different mind control or mind activity kind of experiences. But I also think that they are patient and somewhat philosophical about us. And that may be because their species has been where we have been in the past. And so they see our potential and can foresee the future and see where we are going to end up. Because on many occasions they've said to me comments like, well, you humans will do this in the future, or you humans will develop this technology in the future, or whatever. So it's like we're being helped along that path.
What about, I know, and based on your book and from what I've heard from other people, and we've interviewed other experiencers as well, you know, they're trying to help humanity advance, to get out of where we are now. And while that is a great idea, I don't know, one of the things that I kind of struggle with sometimes is there are those of us who can see the light, that can see what we need to do to move beyond. And yet the masses seem to be dragging us down, and things and sometimes seem to be getting worse and worse. I mean, look at what's happening in my country right now. I feel like I'm surrounded by, I'm in an insane asylum surrounded by all the crazies because everyone is at each other's throats, ready to rip your head off for the least little thing. We're more divided, less spiritual. It's insane. And yet there's myself and a few other people that's like, damn, we don't want to be caught in the middle of this. And so I look at things from not only from a human point of view, but an individual point of view too. What happens to those individuals who are caught up because, hey, we happen to be associated with the human race here and they're all failing?
Well, I think as I point out in my book, Mark, I outline an agenda that's been going on for a very long time with these species and our human race, and it's going to continue on into the future. And if I can just answer your comment there in terms of disclosure, there's a lot of people who are doing some great work in pushing for disclosure, and I've certainly done that on behalf of my network, UFocus NZ in New Zealand. We lobbied the Chief of Defence for 2 years to have the MOD files released. But apart from that, I think the agenda with these entities, as I outline, is change from within, and that's the name of one of my final chapters in the third part of my book. So what they're trying to do is educate vast amounts of people on board craft. We're talking about a huge endeavour here where thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have been taken on board craft for many years, trained, educated in a variety of ways, and these programs have involved the generational factor of the 4 generations within many families. And the last generation that I call third wave is the one that's really going to instigate a lot of change from within our society, because the ETs are not here to save us. They can't come in and save us, or they'll be seen as an invading force. And I can imagine there's some governments that would be quite pleased about that. They would use that to gain power themselves over people. But I think that they are preparing large sectors of mankind for the future, for what's coming up, and they can see what's coming up. They can see where we're going, the path we're going down. And when this group of humans, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of them, come to the fore and reach an age where they are in positions of power or responsibility right across the board in science, education, you name it, every sector of society, then they will start to make changes that haven't been able to be made in the past. And they will use a lot of the skills that they've been taught to do that. And they will be people of good moral character, highly intelligent and highly skilled. And that's when we're going to see these kinds of changes take place. And I'm looking at like the next 50, 70 years or so. I think we will see huge changes as we have seen in the past, but it will be different in that there will be actual positive and constructive work done in many areas on this planet where I think we've been dragging the chain and really not doing what we need to do, or making promises and not getting it done. And a lot of politicians are responsible for that, as well as those in science and medicine as well. So I think we're going to see those changes coming through, and there'll be a little bit of inspiration happening on the planet, and people will feel that there is some hope, and hopefully they will get behind those endeavours.
What about...
Do you think that...
Go ahead, Andy.
Sorry, Suzy, do you think that overall the agenda is a positive one completely, or is there any part of you that thinks there might be something underneath it? I mean, you know, devil's advocate here, if I was wanting to take a planet, maybe I would want to get people to trust me and to kind of go along with what I say, and then kind of like in a very underhand way kind of like pull the rug from underneath the human race. Is there any part of you that thinks that might be going on? And I mean, a good kind of like film that would demonstrate that would be kind of Mars Attacks. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yes. No, Andy, I don't feel that at all. But I can only speak for the contact that I'm having and the agenda that I'm involved in and that I've written about. I can't speak for other people who make comment about their experiences. So certainly the agenda that I outline in my book is a positive one. And I think, and also an answer to your question, you have to understand what these species are like. And this is what I talked about recently when I was speaking in Australia a couple of weeks ago. People talk about wanting disclosure and we're ready now and they can come in and land because we're ready for them. But I put to people, no, we are not ready for them. Because if these entities wanted to take over our planet, Andy, they could do it in a blink of an eye. They don't need to lead us along a deceitful path that goes on for years of gaining our trust and all that sort of thing.
But I'll just
they could just
there.
do it tomorrow.
I'll just stop you there. If we go with what Simon Park says, there is something along the lines of a universal, if you like, law, a kind of, how do you put it, what you can do and what you can't do. And what he seems to say is that a species in the grand scheme of things, whether it's like higher beings or whether it's the source that kind of like disallows this, but he says that one species is not allowed to come along and simply take over another.
How does he know that, Andrew?
I'll just come to that. Pardon, Irene, hold your horses here. Okay, so basically the idea is that a species can't just come along and take over another species. So what they do, they circumvent this by allowing that species to give up their own freedom, to allow that species to allow themselves to be intercepted and kind of like, it's, I mean, you could ask like, how can the 1% rule over the 99% on this planet? And the answer is, well, the 99% allow it. They allow it to happen. An answer to Irene, where he's getting that from, well, Simon Parks is a contactee himself, and he's getting that from his particular sources, who apparently are manted. In answer, Suzy, to kind of like why they don't simply come along and just take over immediately, maybe there is some universal law where they can't do that, but what they can do to circumvent it is to kind of like allow us to give our own freedom up, and allow them to kind of like do that with us giving them our free will, if you see what I mean.
Well, with all due respect to to Simon, and I have listened to a lot of his speeches and talks, and I hope to meet him one day. We have some similarities, but we also have some differences. I think that the agenda that I have been a part of, and hundreds of thousands of other people, is an empowering agenda. So they're not weakening us or taking away our power in any shape or form. And if you read my book, Andrew, you will read the agenda, particularly in part 3, where I describe how this empowerment has been going on for quite a long time. I describe how on a craft, humans actually lecture to humans. The ETs are seeking people within communities who are strong and respected, and who are taught survival techniques, etc., on board craft, because they foresee our weather patterns and our severe weather that's happening worldwide is going to worsen for a period of time at least. And so this whole agenda that I outline is very positive, and it's very empowering. And I think that's the main word that needs to be brought out in association with what I'm describing, is the empowerment that they are giving. They're teaching people healing, they're teaching people new modes of technology and telepathy, and they're enabling mankind to advance and to bring themselves up to speed through the implementation of these 3 waves of humans that have been educated on board the craft, who are already here and already doing the work, and I guess I'm one of them.
Also, Landy, let me comment that a lot of what you described in that sinister agenda, to me, sounds just like a typical politician, and how humanity has ruled the masses through manipulation, through trying to, propaganda. And it doesn't seem to me like we need an alien race to come in and do that. We're doing that pretty much well on our own.
But are we, Mark? Are we? Because the thing is, the human race, I believe, is fundamentally at the core, I think, is good. I think that if you see a child running in a street in heavy traffic, your natural instinct is to grab that child and stop them from running into heavy traffic. But we've been somewhat hijacked, and this is where we go into the whole reptilian thing and the royal family bloodlines and the Rockefellers and the all of that kind of thing, the Rothschild Bank, the Illuminati side of things, and the kind of like the dragon, reptile, snake symbology in every single royal family, the satanic cult rituals, the paedophile rings, all that kind of thing is very dark and I believe off planet. I mean, I wouldn't agree with everything that David Icke says, but I think he's definitely onto something, that there is some kind of satanic, dark, occult elite group that is basically running this world, and I don't think it's a human agenda. I don't think it's a human group that's actually doing it.
Let me ask Suzy a question.
It's interesting that you've said that, Andrew, because a long time ago, don't know when it was, I think I was in about my 30s, the Greys said to me, or to the group of people I was with at the time that we were being lectured to, they said that in the future the Greys would be much maligned, and that this would be an agenda that humans were producing to malign them. They also said that they were dealing, that the group of ETs that they are working with, because it's a conglomerate, not just the Greys, they said that there was another ET species that was creating problems on the planet, and that this agenda was designed to offset that and try to deal with that. And in chapter 9 of my book, I describe how I came into this world, and as a soul, from leaving the field of consciousness as a tiny spark and developing into a soul. And part of that process was actually to go before I suppose you'd call it a panel or a council, if you want to use that word, that was a spiritual overseeing group overseeing this planet. And I was told that there's one for every planet that has life on it. And part of that council were ETs, and I was asked if I would undertake a particular task, be a part of a particular program by these spiritual beings, and I said yes, and they checked me out. They checked out whether they felt I had enough knowledge to bring with me from previous lives to be able to do the job. And part of that process of coming into this life and incarnating as Suzy Hansen was to agree to be trained by a an ET group to be a part of their agenda. Now, this was where I was sent, basically, or requested to go by the spiritual group. The next step, or the interim step to coming into this life, was to go to a grey craft where I spent time as a ball of light, as a soul, being prepared to come into this life. So I don't think that any of that smacks of a negative agenda, but I do, Andy, acknowledge that there are people out there talking about agendas that are negative, and I think that it's entirely possible that there are these other negative agendas taking place. And the unfortunate thing about the human race is that many people in the human race are tied to ego and power, and that's where we go spiritually retrograde.
What about...
Yeah, I would agree there. I do think that it is a case of different agendas going on. I mean, in the same way that if an alien was to come to this planet and say, or ask the question, are humans good or bad? Well, it depends where you go, doesn't it? It depends where you go to. If you go to Sweden, where they're all chilled out, or you go to North Korea, where they're insane. You know.
Well, let me ask this: that with differing agendas, there are different races and species here with different agendas. Some are to help us, some are not, or very counterproductive. I guess my question is, who is there anyone in charge, or is there anyone? Could it go the wrong way? Could these aliens that are maybe have the negative agenda win out? Or will these other beings who are trying to help us let that happen? I mean, it almost seems like a war for humanity.
In some ways, I guess it could be viewed that way. If we've got these two offset agendas, or maybe even more, that experiencers and contactees talk about. I think self-responsibility comes to the fore, and I think that a positive agenda hopefully is going to promote and encourage self-responsibility. And certainly I have seen scientists being lectured to on board craft. They may not remember that consciously in their day-to-day life, but what they have been equipped with may come through in their work. And if you go back to the 2 chapters of my book called The Test Part 1 and The Test Part 2, I described back in 1993 using technology which we have only developed similar but less advanced technology in the last 10 years, but it's clearly leading in a direction of the technology that I used. And so, I have to ask myself, we look at Colonel Corso's book where he talks about how scientists have been given technology, they've downloaded back engineered technology, etc. And certainly we can see stuff coming out now that I was using on a craft and other people like me in the 90s and the 80s. So we are following a line of physics, and it is going to advance very rapidly. That's some research I've been doing for my later speeches into telepathy and how the CIA, DARPA is funding a lot of that research. So it really comes down to, as Andy said, where we're making a choice between what kind of life we want on this planet, what sort of a civilization we want to be, and that comes down to self-responsibility. So I think the positive agenda that I'm outlining is change from within, affecting with the ripple effect, affecting a lot of people, and I can only hope that that will be successful.
You mentioned earlier about incarnating into this life and even going through a review panel and making sure you had enough of the lifetimes to prepare you for this. Now that brings a very good question, because a lot of people look at the UFO and alien contact phenomenon as being extremely physical, nuts and bolts, scientists from another planet. And the reality is that so much of our world is so interconnected, including the spiritual world and our souls in reincarnation. So trying to look at this from a reincarnation standpoint, if we come here many times under many guises, some of them, like you, are being drafted for specific purposes here and missions here. I'm trying to think of the actual question that I want to ask here in regards to the soul. We come here and we have a special mission. We live a certain life. We die. We go back, and then we still come through this cycle of return. I almost feel like this life, we are players on a stage. We come in, we audition for a role, we get it, we come in and we play the role until the play closes. And then we go back and come in. So sometimes I guess my question is, just how important is this physical world when it seems like reality is so much larger and we are only here temporary anyway? So why the focus of all this change on this small physical plane of existence?
Well, you've got several questions in there. I'll do my best to address each of them.
Yes, I know, and I apologize because I'm all over the place trying to sort it out myself.
Well, firstly, I think we have to stop calling we so often hear our soul being referred to as the human soul. From my understanding experience, it's not a human soul. It may be a human soul when it incarnates here as a human, but it is a universal soul, and many people talk about incarnations they've lived elsewhere. And many people like myself talk about incarnations I've lived as an extraterrestrial somewhere else. And in fact, in my book, I write about the 2 lives that I was offered. They both, before I came here, they both involved strong commitment. But one of them was as Suzy Hansen, a human, and the other one was as a large sponge-like object that was intelligent somewhere else in the galaxy. So we have to get past this idea that the soul is human. It's human soul while we're incarnated as a human being. But once it goes back out there into the universe, it can go anywhere and become anything it likes in another life. So that's the first thing. Obviously, some of us get very tied to this planet and we lead multiple lives on it. So that's where, people reincarnating over and over here comes into play. And I have completely forgotten the rest of your questions, Mark.
Well, I guess the rest of the question has to deal with the fact that if we are universal souls incarnating into different lifetimes, what is so important about Earth and humanity?
Okay. All right. Well, I describe seeing something that I called a galaxy screen on board a craft, and I was taken into a room that I now understand. Well, I didn't understand in those days when I was trying to describe it, but I now understand was an augmented reality room. And I was shown by a grey this screen that had a grid over it, and he could touch the grid in any place. I could see our galaxy on it, and he could bring up in the room a virtual reality version of what was in that grid in the galaxy, be it a solar system or whatever. That was quite an experience. But during this experience, he said he was going to show me something that I might find quite shocking. And he brought up our own planet, our own solar system, and he zoomed it in to just the great big planet hanging in the middle of the room in the air in a holographic form. And he said he was going to show me when the 2 bombs were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And he kept zooming out as the effect that he showed me the effect in the electromagnetic field that those explosions had. And so he made the planet appear smaller and smaller and smaller in the air, but you could see the electromagnetic effect, the energetic effect going way, way out into our solar system and beyond. So I think that answers your question of why are they interested in this planet? Well, we are developing all kinds of kill our neighbour kind of technology that could be taken out into space and kill other neighbours. And anything that we're doing on our planet to destroy each other has an impact that goes out there, an unseen impact that goes out and affects other cultures and affects the flow, what he called the flow in space. So we now have high-speed photographic equipment that can capture the shock waves from explosions, etc., bombs exploding and that kind of thing. So we now know the massive impact that it is having on us, our health and our nervous system. And he was likening that to what goes out and affects the health and vitality beyond our planet.
How?
Suzy,
go ahead, Andy.
Have you had any contact with the ETs that allude to the fact that this is a prison planet? And have they spoken about the grid around the planet and the supposed white light, the kind of fake white light that souls go into, get mind wiped, and then dumped back in another body? Has that actually been told to you at all?
No, I've never heard anything about that. The only thing that I've experienced to do with the soul is what I've been describing, but also around about 2010 or 2011, I had the experience of lecturing on board a craft to a group of souls. So there is about 250 balls of light hanging in the air in front of me rather than actual humans that had been brought on board. They'd brought them on in a soul state. And when you address the soul state, you are bypassing the human mind, if I can put it that way, and all its fears and rationales. And they were addressing the soul, and they were requesting of this particular group, we were requesting it was foreseen that they would lose their life in natural disasters, and shortly after this experience there was a whole rash of natural disasters around the world, including the massive earthquake in New Zealand and including the Japanese tsunami. So that made it very poignant for me, this experience. And they were asking these souls to return to the grey craft when their life came to an end. These souls were able to communicate through consciousness. They communicated their sorrow that their life would be ending, but they had this other spiritual understanding of it on another level. They were being asked, it was being requested if they would be willing to become volunteers, to come back to the craft instead of going back into the field of consciousness, what I call where all the souls are gathered waiting for another life, if I can put it that way. They were being asked to come back and be educated and prepared to go back down into the planet very quickly to help raise that consciousness, to grow up as a human, help engender this program of ecological and environmental and spiritual improvement.
Have they alluded at all to the negative types that are currently in charge of the planet at all?
No, never. I've never heard anything about that.
Okay. It would be interesting next time if you meet them, if you do get contact again, to go into that, because the thing is, it is a bit of a bugbear in the kind of the UFO alien community, because I certainly do believe there is a positive group and a negative group, and possibly multiple positive groups and negative groups, each vying for, if you like, either to help the human race or to destroy the human race or overtake the human race. And I think
I would agree with that.
I think we're in the middle of a war zone. I really think we're in a spiritual war zone. And I think like mankind has to basically decide, where do we go? Do we go down the kind of like the transhumanism, kind of like robotic artificial intelligence agenda where we all turn into robots? Or do we turn into the kind of like euphoric, upbeat, creative, organic humans with, psychic abilities and telepathic abilities? But the thing is, what I tend to find, because I came into all this from what you might call a love and light direction, and to begin with it was fantastic, fluffy clouds and angels and spirit and positive ETs and everything's going to be wonderful. But the trouble is, if you completely ignore the dark stuff, then you're unarmed in terms of trying to deal with it. I mean, if somebody tells you that there's a freight train coming, it's a good idea to turn around and face the freight train rather than kind of like sing a merry song and look up at the clouds. So there is a dark group, there is dark happenings, there is an occultic, satanic side to the human race that's coming from what I believe is off-world. So it will be interesting, actually, from your group, sounds to me like it is positive, what their perspective is on how to get rid of the shackles of this dark group that's currently in charge of this planet.
Yes, and Andy, that's what in the part 3 of my book, that if you read that, you'll see the agenda that is outlined there, and then maybe you'll understand where this group is coming from. But I do agree with you that there's positive and negative. But really, if I think I'd be a lot more frightened at this point of humans than I am of the species that I'm working with. But I would just like to add that. I would just like to add, though, that I am certainly not unaware of the dark agendas that are going on. I've been in this field, both UFO sightings and contact, for 42 years, which is a very long time, since I was 20 and I first started interviewing people. So I think I've probably seen it all. I've talked to all kinds of experiencers, abductees, contactees over the years, about all kinds of experiences. But on top of that also, right from early childhood, I have been a medium. If I hesitate to use that word because it does conjure up negative connotations in some people's minds, but really mediumship and talking to spirit and other entities that are beyond the veil, if I can put it that way, has been a normal part of my life. And as an adult, I have done work in that area. So I'm well aware of the very negative and somewhat dark and scary side of the paranormal, and I think that positive agendas working to combat that is a good thing. However, I think, Andy, what it's going to come down to is discernment and self-responsibility for humans. And let's face it, there's a lot of humans out there whose discernment is not that sharp.
Yeah.
And I smiled to myself when I read one of the reviews on Amazon for my book. I was described by someone who's clearly a skeptic, who wrote quite a lengthy review, as a new ager, that my book was a new age book. And I just smiled to myself because I'd run a mile from being called a new ager or being involved in the love and light new age kind of things, because I think there's a big lack of discernment going on in some of those areas.
As like Irene says, none of that hairy-fairy stuff.
Yes, and it reminds me of one of the movies, I can't remember which one it was, one of the space movies, where the alien craft were coming down and there were all these people up on top of a skyscraper welcoming them, and the aliens came down over the building and bombed it, basically.
Yeah, Independence Day.
Independence Day, I think.
Independence Day, yeah. So I think that discernment is needed, and both spiritual discernment and very practical feet on the ground discernment. And it's always, people say to me, oh, what are you reading that book for? That's really negative. That presents a negative light. And I say, well, if I don't understand where that person is coming from and I don't look closely at the negative side of things, how am I going to be able to discern? How am I going to be able to see the difference? So, I read the negative books that are out there, and I think about it, and I turn it over and consider it. And I think that we are definitely at a crossroads as a civilization. We're going to have a lot of decisions to make in our future.
Well, Suzy, we are overdue for a break, so what we're going to do is we're going to take this quick commercial break, and we'll be right back after our messages with our guest, Suzy Hansen, so don't go away.
Good evening, Agent 47. It has come to our attention, through the highest intelligence sources, that Irene Allen Block has published her novel, The Psychic Spy. Our sources tell us that The Psychic Spy is a riveting thriller about Eileen Evans, a beautiful young psychic who is recruited by British intelligence during the Cold War to participate in their top-secret remote viewing spy program. Eileen soon finds herself plunged deeper into the darkest heart of the intelligence community as she is ultimately trained as a spy and a psychic assassin. Nick Redfern says The Psychic Spy is filled with adventure, intrigue, and shadowy characters, and as Irene Allen Block shows, the mind is a mysterious and dangerous tool. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to immediately purchase a copy of The Psychic Spy by Irene Allen Block, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Glanatai.com. This tape will self-destruct in 1 second.
This is James Swagger, host of Capricorn Radio. I'm also an author, engineer and researcher. Capricorn Radio covers alternative history, alternative science, philosophy, and truth-orientated discussions. We are proud to be on the Dark Matter Radio Network live at 8 p.m. Saturdays, Eastern Standard Time. You can catch extra info on darkmatterradio.net, jamesswagger.com for yours truly, and capricornmembers.com for the archives. Don't forget, truth is not democratic, truth is truth.
Imagine no longer being tied down to your computer, but having the freedom to take live talk radio with you anywhere you go. TalkStream Live introduces our first ever iPhone application. The talk shows you follow now follow you, and your iPhone is now the fastest and easiest way to stay connected to the best talk radio on the internet. Listen to live talk shows 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. TalkStream Live, now available in the iTunes App Store.
Contactee Publishing is pleased to announce the release of Stephen Jansen's latest novel, Ghost Tactical, The Labyrinth of Daedalus. The Labyrinth of Daedalus tells the story of Trent Ruck, a member of an elite ghost tactical team who acquired some of the most top-secret military aircraft ever developed. Trent is assigned to steal a high-tech aircraft fitted with the state-of-the-art A-Drive, a top-secret technology that allows the pilot to transcend the very fabric of space and time. Trent finds himself in a race to keep the A-Drive out of the hands of other organizations who plan to use the technology for their own sinister agendas, which threatens the very fabric of our existence. The first book in the Ghost Tactical series, The Labyrinth of Daedalus, is an exciting novel that will thrill lovers of science fiction and high-tech adventures. Ghost Tactical, The Labyrinth of Daedalus, is now available on Contactee.com, Amazon.com, and BarnesandNoble.com.
Wish I knew what you had in mind, down in your mind, child, way down in your mind. I wish I could see what you were trying to say, down in your mind, child, way down in your mind, down on the earth.
And welcome back, everyone, to Paranormal UK Radio. You're listening with Irene Allen Block, Andrew Chaplin, and myself, Mark Johnson. And we are talking tonight with Suzy Hansen, who is the author of The Dual Soul Connection, The Alien Agenda for Human Advancement. And Suzy, I do have to say this has been an incredibly fascinating discussion so far. And I know Andrew was starting to say something a little bit on the break, and I stopped him. So I'm going to let him continue mentioning about his own experience.
Okay, cheers. Mark, yeah, I mean, I find this absolutely fascinating, and Suzy, I could talk to you for like hours and hours, probably days, because this is a subject that I find absolutely fascinating, and it's really interesting that you bring the mediumistic side, because I would also classify myself as a medium as well, and I'm very into the ET stuff, and I believe I may have had the odd ET experience as well. And I'm finding that a lot of people within the ET community are also going a psychic and spiritual and spirit direction, and a lot of people from the spirit direction, the kind of spiritualist direction, are also finding themselves going in the ET direction. There's definitely like a merger going on, whereas maybe 10-15 years ago you probably found this, that there was the UFO camp and then there was the spirit camp, and never the twain shall meet. But that's
absolutely, I've noticed that too, Andy.
Definitely. But in terms of my own experiences, I mean, I'll go with the experience I had in my sixth form, and again, I'm not quite sure if this was my own imagination or whatever, but I was quite ill with a sickness bug, and it was horrible, and I was in bed, and I was kind of like in that in-between awake and asleep state, the kind of the alpha state, almost like a meditation type state. And I just had this really vivid, almost like lucid dream, although it wasn't quite a dream, it was kind of like an experience of these very tall, and I just called them the baldy men, kind of like bald men with completely bald heads, quite tall outside my back door, and I've just got an overwhelming fear of absolute fear. I hated them. I hated everything about them. I hated what they were, where they came from, what their intentions were. It was really quite negative, and I woke up with a bit of a start, and kind of like I just kind of poo-pooed it and just thought, oh, it's probably just a dream, but it seemed a bit more real than a dream. I was just wondering what your take might be on that.
Well, what was it that made you fearful of them? You said they were standing outside your door. So was it simply the unknown and the spookiness of it, or did you have some kind of knowledge or communication take place?
No communication, no knowledge. It was literally flight or fight was running through my entire body. It was like an electricity, energetic thing. It was, these things need to pee off now, or I need to get away from this now. It was that kind of like, imagine you've just walked into like a street and you've gone around the corner and you've got a Rottweiler growling at you, and you've only just noticed it and it's kind of growling at you. Your body goes into immediate fight or flight, and that's how I felt with these particular beings.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because it makes me wonder, have you had experiences previously? Was this some kind of subconscious reaction? Was it a natural human fear reaction? So there's quite a few things, if I was working with you, that I'd be investigating around that.
Yeah. In which case, I'll tell you about the previous experience to that. So this goes back probably to about, I would say, my primary school years, early primary school years. I remember having a few experiences where I dreamt, and it seemed again really clear. I dreamt that I was on my bed, but I was kind of like going through the window for some reason. Now, I will emphasize, I honestly don't remember seeing any greys or any aliens like that, but it was as if I was on my bed going through the window. Now, the weird thing is, like mostly in dreams, you don't really feel things. You don't really feel temperature, and you don't really feel wind. But I do remember as I was kind of like going into the car park next to my house, because there was a factory next to my house. I do remember the coldness of the night, and I do remember the slight wind on my face. But the weird thing is, I was actually still in my bed, or I felt I was still in my bed with my covers. It didn't feel like I was kind of like levitated out, just me. I felt my bed and my covers. But I do remember these little troll type things, like the Jawas in Star Wars, a bit like that, but without the red eyes. And I just remember that. And I don't remember any kind of craft. I don't remember any greys. I don't remember white beam of light, but I do remember the trolls. And I do remember asking my mum, who were the trolls last night? And what were the trolls about? Now, I didn't actually feel fear, but it was kind of like, it felt like it was not just a dream. And I don't
the interesting factor is that you're talking about feeling the wind, etc., etc. So it's like you were in two places at once. You were aware that you were in your bed, but some other part of you was not.
Yeah.
Would that be correct?
Well, it actually felt, within the dream state, it felt like I was actually physically going through the window and physically going into the car park. It was, and I kind of like, there's a specific set of conifer trees outside, and I remember kind of looking at those and just looking at these little trolls. So it was as if it was kind of, the best way I can put it, when you go into like clairvoyance and you're tuning into kind of like a scene, or you're tuning into somebody's life and you're remote viewing in a weird way.
Yes.
It was kind of like that.
Because often in those situations you can get smells and feelings and that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, as if
that's very interesting. Well, you're welcome to talk to me privately about that if you like. That's really good.
And it's also, at the same time, I was also having the psychic stuff happen. So again, bringing in the mediumship side of things. One of the earliest memories I have was in my cot, and this very male, deep, booming voice, very, very deep, saying, "Hello, what's your name?" And that kind of like, and the weird thing was, I was in my cot, and there was an outside landing light, so I could see that there was no one in the room, and there was this big ginger and white teddy bear, and I thought the voice was coming from the teddy bear. So weirdly, I grew up kind of like having this weird, not exactly fear, but apprehension over this teddy bear, because I could swear that the voice was coming from the teddy bear, but obviously it wasn't. But I'm wondering that if that was spirit, or if that was an ET, or whatever it was trying to make the voice come from the bear, so I'd be less scared, because of obviously kids love teddy bears, and kids are more likely to trust a teddy bear than just a discarnate voice. But as well as that happening, the voice, I was also getting deja vu stuff, and I was getting kind of like psychic stuff happening around me as well.
Very interesting, Andy. And I agree with the point that certainly the ETs will try to protect people, from my experience anyway, in any way they can, particularly children, although there's other abductees who will say that isn't the case. But certainly when I was a kid and I used to see the golden beings or these golden silhouettes appearing by the bed, I couldn't see any facial features. It was just like looking at glowing figures. So there were no big dark eyes or anything that might have been scary to me as a child. It wasn't until I was much older, in my 20s, that I actually saw them for the first time as they are. So that's very interesting.
Another thing I'd bring in as well, I know a friend of mine, I won't name her, but she's extremely psychic, like ridiculously psychic. And we often get together, and when we do psychic evenings, clairvoyant evenings, or even talks, even if we go to kind of like paranormal, Neil is one of the co-hosts here, and he has talks in High Wycombe. We often go and see those. When that happens, we often get street lights go out intermittently, and we get an awful lot of black Apache helicopter activity as well. And I remember when I first got into the whole clairvoyant thing myself, because I ignored it up until around about sixth form. And then I kind of got into kind of ghost hunts and kind of ghosty type stuff, and then I opened up probably around about university age, so about kind of 2000, 2001. I was doing a lot of meditating and a lot of readings and a lot of psychic work, and I was getting massive amounts of helicopters buzzing around me, and then that kind of like went away for a bit, and then now I've connected with Irene, who is also massively psychic. Again, we're getting the helicopters coming back again, and they will buzz around the house, and they will just kind of like quite annoying. I just wonder what your take is on that. Who are they? What do they want?
Well, I don't know who they are, but I have heard the same thing many times, and we've had experiences of this in New Zealand, and I've had one experience of it. So, but what I can say is that on one occasion on board craft, the Greys told us that they used the term sweeping, because they reach into your mind and they pick out a terminology that is best going to describe something that they do that you might understand. So they use the term sweeping. They will fly over areas and they will sweep it. So they're using some kind of consciousness technology to search out people who have a natural capacity for psychic abilities. And often those are the people that they will target with experiences or sightings or whatever, to help bring them to that point of opening up and looking at the situation, coming to some kind of acceptance or understanding, or even just researching it and becoming better informed. So it's very interesting that you're talking about the same kind of thing happening with black helicopters. We're assuming that they're humans in the helicopters and that they're not craft disguised as helicopters. I don't know, but if they've got this kind of technology and ability, who's to say that some species hasn't already shared it with humans, and there's a lot more advanced stuff out there happening with humans than we are aware of.
Definitely. And one of the experiences my friend had, actually, it kind of like built up. One of the experiences, she went round her friend's house, and there's a helicopter, and it kept shining a red beam into the room, and this beam affected their television and started making it change channels and kind of like switch it off. Now, I don't believe this is maybe ET technology. It's probably more human technology, but it seemed to be an intimidation factor. And they tried to record it on their mobile phone, because she was with two other people, and they thought they'd recorded it, but when the helicopter went away, the footage was wiped and they didn't have it. Again, I'm not thinking so much grey ETs, it's probably human technology, but who are they? What do they want? And because I do agree, I do think they are sweeping, and they seem to have pinpointed her, because wherever she goes, these helicopters seem to go, and they certainly did it when I was doing a lot of meditation and tuning in as well. It doesn't seem positive. It doesn't seem positive.
No, that doesn't seem positive at all. But I know that some years ago in the States, they developed point and shoot technology, where they can point at a person in a crowd of thousands of people, and only that person will hear voices or sounds or experience certain things, and everyone else around them will not. So this point and shoot technology must be keying into something to do with our consciousness. It's consciousness related or energetically related, I don't know. But if they've developed that years ago, I'm sure there's much more they've developed since then that can affect people, and it can be used as a kind of intimidation. People who are getting too close to certain things can have things happen in their life, and certainly I've had a lot of intimidation myself with our house being watched, house being entered on one occasion, anonymous phone calls, being caught up in a hotel room.
I used to get the blank phone calls, and in this country, in UK, you dial 1471 and it's supposed to tell you which number dialed you, and it was always blank, always withheld or didn't come up. I've had that as well.
People like Andy, who you've had your experiences, Susan, you've had yours. There's somebody like me that I can't quite figure out. I have a very intense interest in this field, and to the point where I do feel I may have some kind of connection. Yet at the same time, I've never seen a UFO. I've never consciously remembered having any kind of late night bedroom encounter or missing time or anything like that. And, one of the things that I constantly complain about is being, not only a paranormal investigator for the last 15 years and never seeing a ghost, or being involved in the UFO community and research, never seeing a UFO. And it's frustrating. And I hear so many people say, well, all you have to do is look up in the sky. Well, I do. I'm always looking in the sky, always searching, never see a thing. And then and here's the second part, more important part of my question is, I'll complain about it. And then, like I was talking with Irene the other day, and I complained about, I never see these UFOs, and I gripe. And then that night I had a dream standing in the driveway of the house I grew up in. And I was standing in the driveway at night looking up in the sky, and I'm watching all these lights and these UFOs doing all this dancing and moving around the sky and putting on these acrobatics and displays. And then I'm sitting there and I'm laughing to myself, and I go, okay, I guess I need to stop complaining I've never seen a UFO. But then I woke up. So is it how much do you feel that they work with us in our dreams? And in a situation like that, is it wish fulfillment that I'm making this up in my dream? Or is it possible that maybe I'm getting a little bit of communication, but they're working with me in my dreamscape? Suzy?
Okay. I think they do work with us in our dreamscape, yes, definitely. But years ago, they told me that there's hundreds of thousands of people in these agendas, but there are also hundreds of thousands of people who, when they incarnated into this life, they agreed to run alongside the agenda, is the way they put it. So a person may not be part of the overall agenda that I'm tied in with, but they may do other things in life that enhance and assist and run alongside the agenda and contribute to it in that way. When I look at you, Mark, obviously you've got a radio show, you've researched it, you're getting interviewing people and putting it out there. So that's a huge contribution that you're actually making. There's a lot of people who are interested in the field but don't do anything at all to assist it, if I can put it that way. So maybe your path is not to be that you have amazing UFO sightings or get taken on board a craft, but you've agreed at some level to assist with the overall exposure of the subject to mankind.
That's actually a very interesting way of putting it.
Yeah, because I get people saying to me, look, I'd love to see a UFO. I'm doing all this work, etc., but I don't see it. And I'll give you an example. Here in New Zealand, we had an elderly gentleman called Harvey Cook, who was a very close friend of mine for over 20 years. He ran the same UFO group for 44 years, and he didn't see a UFO. And he lamented that fact constantly. And he kept saying, well, I haven't seen one. I've been running this jolly UFO group for so long. I haven't seen one myself. So what have I done? I've done nothing in the field because I haven't seen one. But he was on TV, he was on radio, he wrote articles, he ran groups, he ran conferences. So I would definitely say he's one of these people who agreed to run alongside the agenda and help it out. And 2 days before he died, I was sitting in the hospital next to his bed holding his hand, and he said, I don't feel I've done enough. And I said, you've done more than most people, Harvey. You know, what a huge contribution you've made. Maybe that's your path, is this objective contribution where you can't be accused of being biased or part of the scene or part of ufology or whatever. You're running alongside and you're presenting things to the public.
You know,
and it may well be that when you had that dreamlike thing, it was your soul had left your body, and maybe you weren't actually standing in a drive, but you were off somewhere watching them.
It could be, and I think that's a very unique perspective, and it's actually given me a lot to think about.
I just want to insert one of my dreams as well that I had really, really quickly before Irene comes in. Again, I was in kind of like a dream state similar to what Mark was talking about. And in my dream, I was in my bed and I was kind of like aware of the neighbourhood around me. And I dreamt that UFOs were all around the neighbourhood and sending down white beams, like lots of them, into everyone's houses. And it was almost like they were scanning. I don't know what they were scanning for, but these UFOs were scanning. And I remember in my mind I kept saying again and again, oh my god, they're real, they actually exist, isn't this going to be amazing, because soon we'll see it on the news, and thank goodness it's confirmed. And then I woke up out of it and I was back in the real world, and it's like, oh god, the news hasn't confirmed it, and it's not going to be out there.
That's very interesting, because the scanning thing is very similar to what, sounds similar to the sweeping thing. Even though you were saying it was a dream, we don't know what information is presented to us in that dream state that filters through into our mind, and then maybe we utilize it somehow or other. So very interesting, Andy.
Okay, Irene, you're up.
Sorry, I was muted. I'm going to tell you a story, Suzanne, that happened to me about 8 years ago. Now, the house I live in the Gwandareth Valley. Gwandareth, for all those Welsh people out there, I've said it right now. Now I can't say it. Gwandareth Valley, which is known as UFO Highway here in Wales. You can stand out there in the garden on a clear night and just see them going back and forwards all the time. Well, this house actually has 2 back doors, one either end of the house. And the back door that I'm closest to at the moment, this end of the house, I went out to let the dogs out. They ran off down the garden and disappeared. It's a massive garden. They just disappeared. And I saw coming towards me a silhouette. The only way it was like Predator. It started to walk towards me. It was about 5 foot in height. And when it got to about 3 or 4 foot in front of me, I just put my hand up and said, don't go there, bug off, with an F to it, right? And the thing didn't turn around, but it started backstepping and then just disappeared. 2 or 3 years went by, and I was letting the dogs out from the other end of the house. They went off down the garden. The security lights came on as the dogs ran through it, and then they went off as the dogs disappeared off down out of the beam. So the only light that was coming was the light from behind me, coming from the door behind me where I was standing, right, in the house. And coming towards me, it was a moonlight night again, was another one of these predator-type beings. And this one was over 6 foot tall. It was a lot bigger. And as it came towards me, I didn't do anything. I just stood there watching it. That's the only way I can describe it. It was like shimmering like a predator, like out of the film Predator. Okay? You just saw the outline.
Yep.
And it came towards me, and it stopped about 2 foot from me. And I know that we communicated through telepathy. I know that it gave me a lot of information. But as soon as it had gone, I couldn't remember a thing about what it had given me. But as the dogs come running, I called the dogs as they came running back up the garden. This thing was still there in front of me. The dogs stopped at the other end of the patio, which was about 40 foot away, and growled. They would not come towards me. They would not come near that door where I was standing. They just growled. And that was really out of, it just was all absolutely weird. Anyway, I finally did get them indoors. You know, this thing disappeared and I finally got them indoors. Oh, another thing. When they were down the garden, the security lights went off. They were still down the garden when security lights came on, and that's when I saw this thing coming towards me. So it's like it walked through the beam.
Yeah, it triggered it, yep.
So,
well, it's very interesting. Firstly, you mentioned the UFO highway there in Wales, and that's interesting to me because the Greys have talked about how they use energy flows in our planet. And they talk about how our aircraft are cutting through the energy flows, and that in the future we will learn to use the flows of energy to travel through the air instead
Suzy,
of cutting through these flows.
Would you equate those energy flows to ley lines?
Possibly, but it's possible, but I'm thinking more that it's something different to that. It's more to do with the electromagnetic field moving, the way it moves and flows around the planet. But ley lines may well be part of that. I've been told that there's a ley line down the valley that I live on, and certainly I have seen a UFO come down this valley, so that could be part of it as well. So it's interesting that you mentioned this is a regular highway through there. But you also talked about you feel there was a telepathic communication took place and that you'd been given a lot of information, and a lot of abductees and experiencers talk about that, of course, being given information packages or downloads or what I call information info bombs. And we're generally told that will open at some stage in our life when there's something happening that's relevant to that, and at a time when that information is meant to come out. So this would indicate to me, Irene, that you're actually part of something if you've received something like that. And the dogs,
what about the predator type beings?
Yes,
the invisible beings, as I call them.
Okay. And
have you heard of them before?
Yes, shadow beings. Is that what you're talking about?
No.
It's more like if you saw the movie Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger,
Yes.
it's like a cloaking energy field that bends the light, and if it's still,
Right.
you really can't see it, but if it moves, you can see the shimmering outline of it.
Right.
It's very similar to what you saw.
That's interesting. So it's in some kind of phase state where it's moving between one existence and another. Excuse me a minute. So it's and yet the dogs were able to
dogs
pick up
picked it. They did pick up on it,
its
yeah.
energy field, because they were growling. So very interesting, and it'll be interesting to see if at some stage in your life something really opens up in your mind that that grabs you and is quite a turning point. Well, that will be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's laughing, and I know why she's laughing. But so let me ask you this question, Suzy. You've had a lot of these experiences in your lifetime of physically interacting with them, and you've picked up being that you have psychic medium abilities, or as Irene and I like to call with her abilities, extrasensor, something that doesn't have the negative connotations or the hairy-fairy stuff attached to it. So do you feel like sometimes, though, even when you're not physically interacting with these beings, like you get downloaded information, like what Irene said, like that they're still interacting with you either in a sleep state?
I'm always getting downloaded information.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, that happens to me. I get forewarnings of things. I get big packets of information. Sometimes I know that it's happened, but I can't access it, as Irene described. Other times it's right there, it's just suddenly there, and I have this background information about something or a forewarning about something. That happens quite a lot in my life. So that has become a natural part of me. I sometimes don't talk publicly or to other people much, perhaps my husband, about these things. Sometimes it's knowledge that is to be used with discretion. Sometimes I find that it helps me at a time when I'm needing some information or input. And I usually find if I'm going on a bit of a speaking tour overseas that I have in my mind what I think I'll talk about. And I start to plan out the speeches, but then I get like a writer's block and I can't go any further, so I just leave it. And sometimes it can be right up until a few days when I'm due to leave, and then suddenly, bang, one of those coincidences will happen, and something will fall in front of me, and it'll fall into place. Certainly this happened recently before I went to Australia. So, there's this interaction going on frequently or possibly all the time, really, being tuned into something else that you can access or that accesses you with information.
That's interesting. Fits, doesn't it, Mark?
It does in a lot of ways. In fact, I'm going to say that the one thing that you mentioned tonight, Sally, Suzy, that's really hitting home to me is that whole, being like a peripheral participant in that. There's been a few times when Irene and I have had some talks, and something has come through, and every now and then, they will kind of come through, and some of the information that comes through is simple.
You're getting her very, very confused now.
Yes,
so
I know.
You might as well tell her.
Well, there have been a couple of times when Irene and I will be talking or even typing here on Skype, and suddenly this conversation starts and it's going in this direction, and I realize quickly I'm not talking to her. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking with these other intelligences, and there have been some information that...
Only because they're more intelligent than me. I couldn't possibly know what they're saying.
Yeah. Well, some information has come through, and it's really been, let's say it's been eye-opening and changing the direction and how I look at not only all of this type of activity, from paranormal to ufology to even the spiritual end of things. My whole paradigm has shifted. And, a lot of that work, Irene and I have been having conversations on about, what to kind of do with that information in the future. And it's not like saying, we're channeling information from star beings. I mean, we're so grounded and down to earth that we hate even saying crap like that. But at the same time, there's information that I think it's really important that helps raise the awareness of people who are willing or open to hear it. So it's she fights it a lot, and I'm the one who kind of encourages her to open up a little bit more to it, and she can't be bothered with it. She just wants to be a regular person living her life. And so I'm kind of the one nailing it, like sticking the knife in and twisting it, say, come on, let's talk about this. So it's just a fascinating experience all the way around.
It is, and maybe Irene's task is to actually be passing it on to you, and maybe it's not necessarily for Irene to use.
I've told him
but
that.
It's actually for you to use, and maybe for some reason you're not opening yourself to access it yourself.
No,
that's
I told you that too.
Yeah. And maybe if it comes through Irene, you'll believe it and accept it more than if it came through you.
That is something I can accept.
What about this shifting, this jumping that I do?
Well, that's another thing we can bring up. And if you've had this experience, in fact, you mentioned with Andy a little bit earlier, talking about almost feeling like being in two places at once. We're dealing with this reality right now, this physical reality, and yet. And Whitley Strieber, Whitley, and his experience, the author of Communion, even he had mentioned this at one point in some of his writings, that there are multiple dimensions, multiple realities, all taking place at once, and you hear stories of people who might be shifting and going in between some of these realities. And in some cases, talking with Irene, she's experienced that. In fact, she says she's experienced talking to different versions of me out there. And, but it's all part of this reality, and it's just so mind-bending at times. And I was just wondering if you had experienced anything like that in your contact with these people.
Yes, I have. And I agree with you. It is mind-bending, and when I was doing some research for my speeches in Australia recently, I was coming across some stuff that was mind-bending human research, but it was actually helping me to understand better what had taken place in one of the experiences that I describe in my book. And I believe now that it's like back engineering some information, if I can put it that way. It's given me a better understanding of actually what was happening on the craft. I've lost the thread of the conversation again. But yes, I think this does happen where people are in between states, and certainly in my book I describe this whole dual soul aspect that comes through in the book, is where you are able to tap into the grey mindset or the grey intelligence, the grey hive mind or whatever. And like a lot of other experiences, I describe being able on the craft to walk out of my human body and leave it standing in the hallway and take on the form of a grey and work on the craft for that evening and then go back.
I was just going to, sorry about that, Suzanne. I was just going to ask you or say to you, do you think that we are split into two, that we are part human, we are part grey, and we verge?
Well, I think some people are. Certainly the Greys told me, and this was part of my interim step into this life when I found myself as a soul on a grey craft to be prepared and educated for this life. They told me that they were going to enhance the soul, and this would involve being melded with this grey intelligence that I would be able to tap into as a human in this life, and that I would be able to transform on the craft in their environment. And there's many other experiences around the world describing something similar things. But also, if we go right back to the chapter I write on soul origin, I describe that my being, my spark that I am, that was floating in this field of consciousness, it actually split off. When I made the decision to accept this life and not the life of the intelligent sponge on another planet, I had to look at everything that I had learnt and gathered in previous lives, and I had to decide how much of that I was going to take with me into this life, how much of that spark I was going to take with me. So here we bring into possibility the fact that the soul source, before it even becomes a soul, that spark can actually split, can divide and take off what it needs or wants for a particular life, and leave the rest sitting there in a dormant state in this field of consciousness. And that piece that's split off then comes to become goes through steps to become a soul and incarnates into a human. But in that case, then part of me is still up there somewhere, and has it already divided or gone into another life somewhere? But and am I at times able to link into that life through consciousness? I don't know. These are all mind-blowing and mind-boggling questions that I'm sure we'll be looking into in the years to come. And I know there's a lot of research being done into telepathy and the state of the mind and consciousness now.
One thing I've been looking into is the idea, they even start talking about it. Science and physics is starting to accept the idea with string theory and other theories that, time itself is a man-made construct, that all time is actually happening at once. And that would mean I have a vision in my head of you want to call it the higher self, the mind of who we really are, and it does split off into, I liken it almost, instead of just particles floating out, almost like tentacles going out, tendrils going out, and each tendril will go out and experience an existence, a lifetime. And this can all be happening simultaneously. So it's not a piece of us breaking off in this other consciousness, this mind of who we are, the God mind, as you could call it, sitting out there by itself. We're still connected to it, which is why I think we talk about the higher self, the higher mind, that everything that knows the all. We're only accessing just a simple part of it here. But it's not only accessing this life, it's accessing all of these lives at once.
That's right, and we're finding more and more people are talking about past lives they've led, and not just because they've been to a regression therapist and done a past life regression, but simply because at some stage in their life they have a recollection, and it changes their life, it changes the direction they're taking in their life. It helps them to understand the life they're leading now better. So we've got this facet of everything happening at once, where people are learning to access these other realities or other dimensions, if you want to put it that way. And I talk about, as a 12-year-old, at night hearing my name being called and realizing that there's some greys have come to get me and I've got to get up. But that at that point, I realized that it's not the human 12-year-old who's getting up and getting ready to go somewhere. It's actually the grey identity, the part of the melded soul that rises up out of my body and goes with them to the craft and leaves the human body in the bed. And yet the grey identity, if I can put it that way, is able to tap into the human consciousness and vice versa. And there's other experiences I describe in my book where there's this conversation, if I can put it that way, taking place between me, Suzy, my soul state, the grey identity, and a senior grey on a craft talking to all three of us. So I do not have multiple personalities, by the way, but these are indications of other facets of consciousness that we're only just becoming aware of in this world.
It's like I'm trying, and I read that in your chapter, and the whole idea of the dual soul. I guess where I'm having trouble fully comprehending it is, does it seem like it's for you two separate souls, intelligence, whatever, merging together, like, pouring two different types of liquid together into a glass? Or do you feel like maybe it's two aspects of your totality of being? Because again, you've incarnated as greys in the past and other types of entities. You had these choices. Could it be that you were able to just access that part of your own past experiences or that aspect of being part of them instead of separate intelligences? I mean, I know I'm doing a bad job of trying to explain this, but do you have an understanding what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah, I do. No, when I wrote the book, what I didn't have an understanding of and could not recall, even under regression, was how the souls were melded or combined. And I can see now, looking back, why I couldn't access that at that time. And I'm actually going to be writing about this in my second book, how this process takes place. So it's what I have to do in this life is just be a human, right? But at times I am able to access this grey identity, this soul spark of a grey who is actually living at this time, and I have actually met on the craft. So I am somehow or other combined in the soul state with a little facet of his soul that enables me, it's like it's wrapped around me, and I'm able to access their intelligence or their thought processes and actually to reform into their form on a craft. I've had a number of experiencers worldwide over the last 6 months who've contacted me saying, can we talk on Skype, because I think that this might be what I am as well, and I've been giving it a different name up until now, or I haven't fully understood it. So I have had some really in-depth and quite fascinating discussions with these people who are basically saying exactly what I'm saying and what I have experienced. So this is great confirmation coming back to me, and there's little things that they've said which they would only say if they'd experienced it, because they're things I haven't said publicly or didn't put in my book. So it's a very real thing that's happening that is enabling certain people working in these programs that I talk about, this agenda, to access that grey intelligence and way of thinking and knowledge pool at a time when they need to is probably the best way that I can put it at the moment, because I actually don't want to reveal the rest of what I know at this point, because I like to take time to really study it, think about it, really research it before I put it into writing.
Yeah, and actually that's very, very wise of you, because again, it helps you to fully understand what the process. Now let me ask this, is it human ego that makes that thought of having your soul merge with somebody else a bit frightening because of you fear of losing your own identity?
No, I don't have any fear of that whatsoever. I feel that I was told that my generation was going to struggle a little bit with this, because it's a new thing that's being done with between ETs and humans. On craft, I have seen the same kind of dual soul combination between greys and mantis and greys and other species, and I have actually seen them mutate in front of my eyes when I've been doing healing or whatever. I've seen them mutate in physical form, mutating between the two, so you can see the two different forms merging, which was quite an experience to watch. So, but in this life, it's like a trial thing for my generation, but the next generation down, children of people like myself, it is a much more natural merging of the two. So they consider themselves human, but they have these very enhanced abilities that come much more naturally, possibly, than it does for my generation.
One of the
Suzy?
Go ahead, Irene.
Sorry, Mark. You say you haven't seen any reptilians.
That's right.
Do you believe reptilians exist?
Well, I have no reason to disbelieve it, because I've heard a lot of people I trust talk about their experiences with them.
Mm-hmm. And then most of these experiences that people have with reptilians are the negative experiences. Is that right?
No. I've talked to quite a number of people in the States, here in New Zealand and in Australia, for example, who've actually had positive experiences.
Yeah, I always thought they were the baddie boys.
Well, yeah, I mean, most people thought the greys were too, but that's really turning around now, certainly down in this part of the world. But no, I've talked to experiencers who've had very positive experiences with reptilians. You look at Jim Sparks' book, he talks about the reptilians gathering around him and giving him information and knowledge.
Yes, and I know an experiencer here in the U.S. that I've talked with also talks about having positive experience with reptilians, and I kind of liken that as possible. Let's face it. Let's look at human beings. Let's look at the different nations and different countries with different agendas here. Yet we're all human.
That's right, and I think we can sort of idealize the idea of an alien too much, where we have certain expectations of them based on maybe some UFO information, some New Age philosophy, and as well as pulp fiction and movies. We can idealize them, and if we're going to do that, we might be disappointed, because I think they probably, as advanced as they are still learning too and evolving, and I think that we have to get our feet on the ground and look at all the possibilities.
Very true. Very true.
And your experiences with the mantid type, can you explain kind of what they look like? Do they look exactly like a praying mantis, or kind of influences of a praying mantis?
Influences of, not exactly like, aspects
so they're kind of like a humanoid form, but with kind of
yes,
like
a humanoid form, but the facial, the head is reminiscent certainly of the mantid, and certainly the way they move their limbs as well.
Did they have hands, or did they have kind of like claws, or
no, they had claw-like fingers, but they were quite mobile. And the one that I saw actually had a long white coat on, which is quite unusual. You hear a lot of experiencers and abductees describe how often the entities on the craft are wearing a white coat-like garment, or a square thing that's attached at the shoulders. So I couldn't actually see the central part of the body, but he was seated, and when I came in, he was pretty much near, his head was quite near mine. When he stood up, he was over 7 feet tall, and the part of the craft that we were in had very high doorways, obviously to accommodate this species that operates in that area of the craft. So he was involved in some healing, doing some healing on me. I'd had a number of serious illnesses and a serious car accident, so that was carried out at that time. I haven't seen them that often, but I have seen them on several occasions. But mainly I've seen a lot of mixed species greys. So when you're walking down a corridor, you're not just seeing the proverbial pale grey with the big black eyes. Sometimes you see very blue eyes, coloured eyes, different filaments moving within the eyes so that they're not just completely black, and a lot of different variations in the skin and the surface, the texture of the skin.
Have you ever noticed any physical emotions from them, like sadness or anger?
Yeah. Actually, I have, but they were actually mimicking human emotion, human physical emotion at that time. So people say that they have no sense of humour, the greys, and that's, for me anyway, that's absolutely incorrect. They do have emotions, and but they express them differently to us. They express them energetically, and if you're not picking that up, you're not going to pick up the emotions. We express ourselves with body language and facial expression, so people can pretty much read what we're thinking by our expression, but they have a much more bland, expressionless face, and they use the thought process and their energetic field to express emotion. They can convey it through telepathy and putting images in your mind, or affecting the part of your brain that engenders emotions in you. But on a couple of occasions, I have seen greys that I've been working with who have mimicked human emotion as a form of sense of humour. So on one occasion, my son and I were walking down a corridor. We were to meet a grey in a particular room, and normally you would just go to that room and enter it. But we were a little late, it seems, and he was standing at the end of the corridor, and when he saw us coming, he folded his arms and he leaned against the door jamb and slightly tapped one foot. And that we knew from what he was conveying telepathically or energetically that he was mimicking a human characteristic that we would find amusing, and it was amusing to watch. On other occasions, I have waved goodbye, or my son has waved goodbye to a grey, and have actually put their hand up with a slightly self-conscious kind of demeanour about them, and have waved back, because that wouldn't be a normal action for them to do. So we do have these little crossovers taking place where we're getting to know them, but they're also getting to know us.
Okay, that's interesting. No, I was just wondering whether they ever showed frustration, impatience, anger.
Well, some experiencers and abductees have expressed that they have telepathically received anger or frustration. On occasions, I've felt a slight frustration in the way they've conveyed something to me. For example, I asked a very silly question off the top of my head once when I saw a craft that was shaped like a shoebox. And I said to the grey near me, well, how can that fly? And he immediately came back with a very precise comment about aerodynamics that really put me in my place and showed his complete frustration with my lack of scientific understanding. So, yeah, they express it through the way that they express the telepathy to you mainly.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We only have a couple of minutes left. Let me ask one last question, Suzanne. Are you still having these experiences at a level that you did after your 20s, or has it tapered off? Are you still in contact with them a lot?
Yes, I am, but it has changed in the sense that because I'm so far down the track with the kinds of experiences I've had with them and my conscious memory of them, that there is no longer a need, because of where I'm at and what I'm doing now, for me to do things a certain way with them. So there has been a change. There has not been a reduction in contact, but there's been a change in the way that contact takes place.
Fantastic.
Suzy, this is another thing that's kind of like what I'm wondering about. When a medium is talking to so-called spirit on the other side. There's a possibility, and there's some people that are talking that maybe mediums are actually talking to ETs, pretending to be spirit for whatever reason. Have you heard of this, and if so, why?
No, I haven't heard of that, because I think we need to differentiate between clairvoyant and medium. A medium generally knows who they're speaking to. They can generally see them and generally be able to identify them. A clairvoyant doesn't always have that ability. They may be able to give a message that comes to them, but not know who the message is from or who that person is or what that entity is. I think that there are deceiving spirits out there. I've certainly had experience with that as a medium myself. And they will pose as anything that might engender fear or whatever in a human being as part of a control process that some spirits are quite keen on doing. So here's this dark side of the paranormal, Andrew, that we talked about before. I think that deception can take place, but as I have not yet met someone who's talked about a spirit they think was an ET that was posing as a spirit.
Because I mean, even Irene, you said that you've had spirit come through that you thought was one thing and it turned out to be something deceptive.
Like tricksters, yeah.
Yeah, tricksters. Because this is quite a bugbear of mine. I would love to believe in fluffy clouds and kittens and rainbows and everything's wonderful, but I do know that tricksters do exist, and love and light, although there is love and light, you know, we keep saying that phrase, love and light, there is that does exist, but there's also the dark as well. And I just don't want to, I don't want to be deceived, and I don't want to go down the wrong path or the false path, if you see what I mean.
Well, that's all part of learning, Andy.
Yeah, so how do we stay on the straight path?
I'll teach you.
And a lot of it,
we've come to the end of the show.
Yeah,
now.
I will say, Andy, a lot of it has to come with your own inner intuition. You got to listen to that gut feeling, because you feel energies, and you would be able to ascertain those. Now, Suzy, your book, The Dual Soul Connection, The Alien Agenda for Human Advancement. Now, you wrote this with U.S. astrophysicist Dr. Rudy Child. And where can people get that book?
Okay, it's available as paperback on Amazon with black and white images. It's available as a paperback directly from me through Communicator Link, www.communicatorlink.com, and that one has coloured images in it. And it's also available as an ebook on Amazon Kindle. So both the paperback and the Kindle are available on Amazon UK, Amazon US, Canada, and Europe.
And I will tell you, I read the entire book. It's fantastic. I highly recommend it. So definitely pick that up.
Thank you.
I'm getting it.
Well, you better.
And I've really enjoyed talking to the three of you today. It's been a great, relaxed kind of conversation, and I've learnt a lot from all of you. And I hope that
we've learnt a lot from you, Suzanne.
Oh, thank you.
Definitely.
It's been a mutual experience then.
Come back, Suzy, as well. Because this is one of those conversations where it could just go on and on and on. There's so much.
I know.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Suzy, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been a sincere pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, it's been lovely, Suzy.
Thank you.
You want to take us out, Irene?
Okay, that's a wrap, everybody. Good night.
Okay, we'll see you all next week, everybody. Take care.
Mark, before we go, quickly tell everyone where they can pick us up.
Well, you can listen to us every Monday night on the Dark Matter Digital Network from 10 to midnight Eastern Time. Wednesdays on our Paranormal UK Radio Network, pauk.com, at 9 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time and Eastern Time. And if you miss any of our live broadcasts, you can catch us on podcasts, Stitcher, and iTunes. Podcasts are uploaded weekly, so be sure to tune in. And Blog Talk Radio. Yes, there's so many I keep.
And we'll talk stream live.
Yes. All right. Thank you, everybody, and have a great night.